Her family sold her for rations. The human who saved her gave her hope. The caravan smelled like fear and recycled air. Sareth pressed herself against the cold bulkhead of the cargo hold, her ears flat against her skull, turquoise eyes tracking the 16 other captives who shared the cramped space. Most were Villani like her, though a few human women huddled in the far corner, their faces hollow with resignation. The ship's engines thrummed through the metal, a rhythm she'd memorized over 3 days of transit. 3 days since her brother Joran had placed the credit chip in her palm and told her the family would survive the famine season because of her sacrifice. Her skin felt too warm, the pink undertones across her cheeks deepening with shame she couldn't suppress. The traders had examined her with clinical disinterest, noting her curvaceous build and decorative features the way one might catalog damaged goods. Too soft for labor, too pretty to waste on colonies. She'd fetch a decent price at the outer stations where men paid for beauty they couldn't find in the mining camps and military outposts. A shudder vibrated through the deck plating, different from the engine's steady pulse. Sarath's ears swiveled forward, instinct overriding her trained submissiveness. Around her, the other captives stirred, confusion rippling through the hold. Another impact, harder this time, and the emergency lighting flickered to amber. The door mechanism shrieked as it disengaged, and the lead trader, a barrel-chested human named Crow, burst through, his face twisted with rage. "Stay down," he snarled, brandishing a shock baton. "Don't make this worse." The engines died. In the sudden silence, Sareth heard the distinctive hiss of a hull breach being sealed, then footsteps in the corridor beyond. Heavy, deliberate. The traders were shouting now, weapons fire crackling in short bursts that made her flinch against the bulkhead. Then quiet again, too quiet. The door opened. Malcolm Hayes filled the threshold like a natural disaster, broad-shouldered and breathing hard, his dark eyes scanning the captives with an intensity that made Sarath's pupils contract despite the dim light. Blood smeared his knuckles, and a plasma burn marked his left shoulder, but he stood solid, a heavy wrench gripped in one scarred hand. His gaze swept over her, paused, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition or fury, she couldn't tell which. "Can anyone walk?" His voice was rough, urgent. When no one answered, he stepped inside, his movements contained but radiating barely checked violence. "I destroyed their engines and comms. You have maybe an hour before backup arrives. Anyone who wants to leave, move now." The human women scrambled up first, stumbling toward him with desperate gratitude. The Villani hesitated, exchanging glances that spoke of cultural conditioning too deep for sudden rescue to erase. Sarath remained frozen, her back pressed to the wall, ears tilted in wary confusion. Humans didn't do this. No one did this. There had to be a price. Malcolm was helping a pregnant woman to her feet when his attention returned to Sareth. He crossed the hold in 3 strides, crouching before her, and she caught the scent of sweat and scorched fabric. Up close, his face was all hard angles and exhaustion, but his eyes held something she couldn't name. Grief, maybe? Or guilt, old enough to have worn grooves into his features. "You hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, a minute movement. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Why are you doing this?" His jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, then he pushed to his feet and offered his hand. "Because I can." She stared at his palm, broad, calloused, marked with old burns and newer cuts. Taking it would mean choosing something she didn't understand. Refusing it would mean accepting the future Joran had sold her into. Her fingers trembled as she reached up, and when his hand closed around hers, warm and solid, her breath caught. He pulled her upright with effortless strength, steadying her when her legs threatened to buckle. The other captives were filing out now, some weeping, others silent with shock. Malcolm kept her hand in his as he guided her toward the door, his grip firm but not controlling, and Sareth found herself cataloging details. The tattoo she glimpsed beneath his torn sleeve, the set of his shoulders, the way he positioned himself between her and potential threats. The caravan's corridor was a disaster. 2 of the traders lay unconscious near the galley, their weapons scattered. Crow slumped against a control panel, blood pooling beneath him, his breathing shallow. Malcolm didn't spare them a glance as he led the group toward the docking port where his ship waited, its hull scarred and patched but its airlock open like a promise. "This is the Wayfarer," he said, ushering them aboard. "She's not much, but she'll get you to the nearest station. There's food in the galley and bunks in the crew quarters. Help yourselves." The captives dispersed into the ship's interior, their relief palpable. Sarath stood at the airlock threshold, watching Malcolm move through his vessel with practiced efficiency. Sealing the port, initiating launch sequences, his movements economical despite the injury he favored. A woman with dark braided hair and missing fingers appeared from the engine room, oil-stained and sharp-eyed, taking in the situation with a single assessing look. "You actually did it," Lena said, something between admiration and exasperation in her tone. "You're insane." "Get us clear," Malcolm replied. "I'll deal with the fallout later." Sarath's ears swiveled as the ship's systems came online, the hum of functional engines, a stark contrast to the dying caravan they'd left behind. Around her, the rescued women were already claiming spaces, finding blankets, discovering the simple mercy of unlocked doors. But Sarath remained rooted near the airlock, her mind racing through calculations that had nothing to do with navigation. She had no home to return to. Joran had made that clear when he'd handed her over. The family had already mourned her, already reallocated her rations. Even if she returned, she would always be the one who'd been sold, the one whose presence was a reminder of lean seasons and hard choices. The colony had no place for her now. But here, on this battered freight ship with a human who destroyed slavers for reasons he wouldn't name, she felt something she hadn't expected. Choice. Malcolm was adjusting the helm controls when she approached, her footsteps silent on the deck plating. He glanced at her, then did a double take when he realized she was still there, not huddled with the others. "Station's 2 days out," he said, mistaking her intent. "I'll make sure you're registered with Refugee Services. They'll find you." "I want to stay." The words came out steadier than she'd anticipated, her ears upright despite her racing heart. "Here, on your ship." He stared at her, shock and something darker crossing his features. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know I have nowhere else." She met his gaze, forcing herself not to look away even when her instincts screamed submission. "And I know you risked everything to free us. That means something." His expression shuddered, grief surfacing before he pushed it down. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "I'm not a good bet. I make bad decisions. People get hurt." "Then we have that in common." She touched her ear, a nervous habit, then forced her hand down. "Please." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the Wayfarer's steady rhythm. Finally, Malcolm's shoulders dropped, exhaustion and something like surrender in the movement. "Temporary," he said, "until you figure out what you actually want." Sarath nodded, relief flooding through her even as she recognized the lie they were both telling. Nothing about this felt temporary. It felt like standing at the edge of something vast and terrifying, something that might destroy her or remake her entirely. She was willing to find out which. The first week aboard the Wayfarer taught Sarath that humans occupied space differently than Villani. Malcolm moved through the ship like he was constantly braced for impact, his shoulders tight and his movements economical. But when he worked, repairing a coolant leak or recalibrating the nav system, his hands moved with a precision that bordered on reverence. She watched him from the galley doorway as he replaced a burnt relay panel, his fingers deft despite their size, and something in her chest tightened at the care he took with even damaged components. Lena was easier to read, her restless energy filling whatever space she occupied. She'd cornered Sarath on the second day, dark eyes assessing, and handed her a datapad loaded with basic ship systems. "You're staying, you work," Lena had said, not unkindly. "Can't have dead weight on a vessel this size. You good with numbers?" Sarath had nodded, her ears tilting forward with cautious interest. Mathematics had been one of the few subjects her family hadn't discouraged, useful for calculating rations and resource distribution. Within hours, she was running inventory checks, her turquoise eyes tracking columns of data with an efficiency that made Lena grin. "Knew you had a brain in there," Lena said, clapping her shoulder hard enough to make Sarath stumble. Ignore Malcolm's brooding. He'll warm up once he remembers how to act human. But Malcolm didn't warm up. He was polite, distant, his interactions with Sarath limited to necessary coordination. He ate his meals standing in the galley, never lingering. When she passed him in the corridors, he pressed himself against the bulkhead to give her space, as though proximity might contaminate them both. His avoidance felt deliberate, controlled, and it confused her more than outright hostility would have. On the 8th day, she found him in the cargo hold running through combat drills, his body moving through strikes and defensive postures with brutal efficiency. Sweat dampened his shirt, and the tattoo on his shoulder was fully visible, an intricate design of interlocking circles and a name rendered in elegant script. Elena. He noticed her watching and stopped mid-movement, breathing hard. Need something? His tone wasn't hostile, just carefully neutral. Who is Elena? The question escaped before she could stop it, and she flattened her ears in immediate apology. I'm sorry, that was inappropriate. Malcolm grabbed a towel, wiping his face as he studied her. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sat heavily on a storage crate, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. My sister. His voice was rough. She was 16 when traffickers took her. I was 19, working security on a station 3 sectors away. By the time I got the message, she was gone. They found her DNA on a derelict transport 6 months later, but no body, no trail. Sarath's ears rotated forward, her pupils dilating with sympathy she couldn't suppress. She moved closer, hesitant, and touched the tattoo with careful fingers. His skin was warm beneath her touch, the muscle beneath tense. Villani carries scars too, she said softly, but we hide them. Yours is visible, honest. His hand came up, covering hers against his shoulder, and the contact sent heat racing up her arm. I destroyed that caravan because I couldn't save her. Doesn't make me noble, just makes me a man who's 9 years too late. It saved me. Her voice was barely a whisper. That matters. His dark eyes met hers, something raw and unguarded in his expression, before he pulled away and stood. You should get some rest. Long flight tomorrow. She watched him leave, her hand still tingling from where he'd held it. The shift happened gradually, in increments so small she almost didn't notice until they'd accumulated into something undeniable. Malcolm started teaching her basic self-defense in the cargo hold, insisting she needed to protect herself if trouble found them again. He moved with controlled restraint, demonstrating holds and counters, his hands guiding her positioning with impersonal efficiency. But when he showed her how to break a wrist lock, their bodies pressed together from shoulder to hip, and she felt the exact moment his breathing changed. Her ears flushed darker pink, betraying her, and her pupils dilated so wide the turquoise of her irises nearly disappeared. Villani biology didn't lie. Proximity to someone she was drawn to triggered responses she couldn't control. Malcolm noticed, his gaze dropping to her face, and his grip on her wrist gentled. Sorry, he muttered, stepping back. Didn't mean to. You didn't. She caught his arm before he could retreat completely, her courage surprising them both. It's just, my body responds when I feel safe. I've never felt that before. His expression shuddered again, but not before she saw the conflict there, want warring with guilt. He cleared his throat and returned to the drill, but the space between them felt charged now, electric with possibility neither of them knew how to navigate. 2 days later, they entered the electromagnetic dead zone. The Wayfarer's instruments flickered and died as they crossed the threshold, navigation systems useless in the strange field distortion that made the sector nearly impassable. Malcolm cursed under his breath, manually adjusting their trajectory, but every correction seemed to pull them further off course. I can feel it, Sarath said suddenly, standing from her station. Her ears swiveled independently, tracking something he couldn't perceive. The fields, they're not random. There's a pattern. Malcolm shot her a skeptical look. You can sense electromagnetic currents. All Villani can. We evolved in low light with predators who used electrical fields to hunt. We had to learn to read them. She moved to the viewport, her eyes unfocusing as she concentrated. Go 15 degrees starboard. The distortion is weaker there. He hesitated only a moment before adjusting course. The ship's systems stabilized immediately, the flicker in the lights evening out. Sareth continued calling out adjustments, her voice steady and confident in a way he'd never heard before, and Malcolm followed her guidance without question. They navigated the dead zone in half the expected time, emerging into clear space with minimal damage. When the autopilot engaged, Malcolm turned to find her smiling, genuinely smiling, her ears upright and relaxed, and the sight of it hit him like a physical blow. "You're not fragile," he said, wonder in his voice. "They told you that you were, but you're not." Her smile faltered. "My family said I was decorative, useless for real work." "Your family was wrong." He crossed to her in 2 strides, and before he could think better of it, his hands cupped her face, thumbs brushing the soft fur of her ears. She inhaled sharply, her whole body going still. "You're capable, Sareth. You're smart and observant, and you just saved our asses with skills no one bothered to value. You're not a burden. You've never been a burden." Her eyes glistened, and she leaned into his touch, trembling. "No one has ever touched me with kindness, not like this." His thumb traced the curve of her ear, watching it twitch beneath his touch, and the tenderness in the gesture undid something in both of them. He wanted to kiss her, wanted it so badly, his restraint felt like a physical ache, but she was vulnerable and he was damaged, and the timing was impossible. "Sareth," he began, but the proximity alarm shrieked, shattering the moment. Lena's voice crackled over the comm. "Malcolm, we've got company. 3 ships, corporate signature. They're hailing us." Malcolm's hands dropped, his expression hardening into something cold and tactical. "Battle stations. Sareth, get to the—" "I'm staying." Her ears were forward, determined. "I can track their movements better than your sensors." He wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. The view screen flickered to life, revealing Captain Voss's sharp features and pale eyes. Behind her, other figures moved in the background of her ship's bridge. "Malcolm Hayes," Voss said, her voice clipped. "You're harboring stolen property. Return the Villani female, and we'll consider this a misunderstanding." "She's not property." Malcolm's voice was granite, "and you can go to hell." Voss's expression didn't change. "We expected that response, which is why we brought additional motivation." The camera angle shifted, revealing another figure. Female, human, in corporate security armor. Dark hair pulled back severely, her face younger than it should be, but marked with something broken and rebuilt wrong. Malcolm's world tilted. "Elena," he whispered. His sister stared at him through the screen with blank, professional eyes, no recognition in them at all. When she spoke, her voice was flat, mechanical. "You have 10 minutes to comply before we disable your engines and board by force." The transmission cut. Malcolm stood frozen, his face drained of color, and Sareth watched his entire world collapse in the space between one breath and the next. Malcolm didn't speak for 3 days. He piloted the Wayfarer through evasive maneuvers with mechanical precision, outrunning Voss's pursuit ships through asteroid fields and gravity wells that would have torn apart less experienced pilots. His face remained blank, his movements automated, and when Sareth tried to approach him, he turned away without acknowledgement. She stopped trying after the first day. Her ears stayed flat against her skull, pressed so tight they ached. She ran inventory checks she'd already completed twice, recalibrated systems that didn't need adjustment, and ate meals alone in the galley while Malcolm stood watch on the bridge. The silence felt like condemnation, proof of what she'd known all along. She was the reason danger had found them. She'd brought corporate hunters and impossible choices into his life, and now his sister's ghost had materialized into something far worse than death. She was a burden. She'd always been a burden. On the 4th morning, Sareth began packing her few possessions into a salvaged duffel. A spare jumpsuit Lena had given her, the data pad with inventory systems, a small metal disc she'd found in the cargo hold that caught light in ways that reminded her of home, though home had never wanted her. The Wayfarer would dock at Haverton Station for supplies in 6 hours. She would disembark there, disappear into the station's depths, and Malcolm could return to the business of hunting his sister's broken remains without her complicating everything. Her fingers trembled as she sealed the bag. "Where do you think you're going?" Serath spun, finding Lena in the doorway, arms crossed and expression thunderous. The engineer's dark eyes blazed with something between anger and exasperation. "The station," Serath said quietly, her ears tilting back in defensive submission. "It's better if I leave." "Better for who?" Lena stepped inside, her missing fingers tapping against her forearm. "Because it sure as hell isn't better for Malcolm, and I'm guessing it's not better for you either. I brought Voss here. I brought his sister back into his life in the worst possible way. He can't even look at me." "He can't look at anything." Lena's voice softened fractionally. "You think this is about you? That man just watched his dead sister show up as a corporate weapon. He's not withdrawing because you're a burden. He's paralyzed because his entire reason for living just got ripped apart." Serath's ears swiveled forward despite herself. "I don't understand." "Malcolm has spent 9 years convinced he failed Elena. That guilt is the only thing holding him together." Lena moved closer, her scarred hand reaching out to grip Serath's shoulder. "And now he's learned she survived, but she's been turned into something he can't save. That's not your fault. That's the universe being cruel." "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Stop running away the second things get hard. Stop letting your culture's bullshit tell you that needing someone makes you worthless." Lena's grip tightened. "I've seen how that man looks at you, like you're something irreplaceable, and I've seen how you look at him, like he's the first person who ever made you believe you deserve to exist. You walk off this ship, you're proving everyone who ever called you expendable right." The words hit like a physical blow. Serath's breath caught, her turquoise eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. "What if he doesn't want me here?" "Then make him tell you that himself, but I'm betting he can't because it's not true." Lena left before Serath could respond, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Serath stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the duffel bag, before her hands moved to unpack it, slowly at first, then with growing determination. She found Malcolm in the engine room 2 hours later. He sat on the deck plating with his back against the coolant manifold, a cracked datapad resting in his lap displaying Elena's personnel file. His face was haggard, shadows carved beneath his eyes, and he didn't look up when Serath entered. She sat beside him without asking permission, her shoulder pressing against his arm, and waited. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the steady thrum of the engines. Minutes passed, then more. Finally, Malcolm's voice emerged, rough and fractured. "She was kind, Elena. She used to bring home injured animals and try to fix them even though we barely had enough food for ourselves." His thumb traced the image on the screen. "The last thing she said to me was that she was proud of me for getting the security job. Proud I was doing something that mattered." Serath's hand found his, threading their fingers together. His grip tightened, desperate. "I keep thinking if I'd been faster, if I'd paid more attention to the reports, I could have stopped it. But I was 19 and stupid and convinced nothing bad could touch us because we'd already survived so much." His voice cracked. "And now she's alive, but she's not. They broke her and rebuilt her into something that can look at me with empty eyes and call me a target." "You didn't fail her." Serath's voice was steady, her ears rotating toward him in silent solidarity. "Someone took her and destroyed who she was. That's not the same thing." "Isn't it? I should have..." "Should have what? Predicted the future? Fought traffickers across 3 sectors when you were barely more than a child yourself?" She squeezed his hand, forcing him to meet her gaze. "I understand the difference between failing someone and someone choosing to become something you can't reach, or being forced to become it." His dark eyes searched hers, raw with grief. "How do I let her go?" "The same way I'm learning to let go of the family that sold me, one day at a time until the weight gets lighter." Her free hand came up to touch his face, her fingertips gentle against his stubbled jaw. "You're allowed to grieve what she was. You're allowed to rage at what she became, but you can't carry guilt for choices that were never yours to make." He pulled her against him suddenly, his arms wrapping around her with bruising intensity, and she felt the tremor run through his body as 9 years of grief finally broke open. She held him while he shook, her cheek pressed to his chest, listening to his heartbeat thunder beneath her ear. Her ears stayed forward, attentive and present, and when his breathing eventually steadied, neither of them pulled away. "I thought you hated me," she whispered against his shirt. "Thought I'd ruined everything." "Never." His voice was muffled in her hair. "I was drowning and didn't want to drag you down with me. But Sereth—" He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands cupping her face the way he had before Voss shattered their world. "I don't know how to protect you from this. Voss won't stop. Elena won't stop. And now—" The comm system crackled to life, interrupting him. A Villani voice filled the engine room, formal and coldly familiar. "Malcolm Hayes, this is Joran of the Villani Colonial Authority. I'm transmitting on behalf of Captain Voss, who has presented evidence that you are harboring my sister unlawfully." Serath's entire body went rigid, her ears flattening against her skull. Joran's voice continued, devoid of warmth. "The Villani government has agreed to cooperate with corporate recovery efforts. My family will provide testimony regarding Serath's legal status as contracted property in exchange for full payment being honored. You have 24 hours to surrender her to neutral custody, or bounty hunters will be authorized to retrieve her by any means necessary." The transmission ended. Malcolm's hands were still on Serath's face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones as fury blazed in his eyes. "They sold you twice." "They never stopped selling me." Her voice was surprisingly calm, though her ears trembled against her skull. "I was merchandise to them. I always was." "Then we stopped running." Malcolm's voice hardened into something sharp and dangerous. "Voss wants a fight? Your family wants to cash in? We give them one, but on our terms. We lure them somewhere we control, somewhere your abilities give us advantage, and we end this." Serath met his gaze, her turquoise eyes luminous with resolve. For the first time since boarding the Wayfarer, she felt something other than fear or obligation. She felt rage, clean and bright, and entirely her own. "Where?" Malcolm's grin was feral. "I know a place. Abandoned mining facility in the Kessler Belt. Failing power grid, unstable electromagnetic fields, perfect for someone who can read them." He stood, pulling her up with him, his hands sliding down to grip hers. "But this gets ugly. They're not going to stop until we make them. You understand what I'm asking?" Her ears rotated forward, high and proud, every trace of submission burned away. "I understand that I'm done being cargo, and I understand that you're the first person who ever saw me as anything else." She squeezed his hands, her voice fierce. "So let's show them exactly what a mistake they made." Malcolm pulled her close, his forehead pressing against hers, and for a moment they simply breathed together. Two people who'd spent their lives being told they were failures, choosing instead to become something their worlds couldn't contain. "Together, then," he murmured. "Together," she agreed. And somewhere in the void behind them, predators closed in, unaware they were no longer chasing prey. The Kessler Belt mining facility had been dead for 6 years, its skeletal framework drifting through debris fields like a metal graveyard. Malcolm brought the Wayfarer in low, using the facility's bulk to mask their signature, while Serath mapped the interior using her electromagnetic sensitivity. Her ears swiveled independently as she traced power conduits, identifying which sections still held residual charge and which had gone cold. "Central Hub has 3 active nodes," she reported, her turquoise eyes unfocused with concentration. "The rest is intermittent. They'll have to funnel through narrow corridors if they want stable footing." Lena worked beside her, modifying portable charges to overload on command. "Give them a light show they won't forget. I'll rig the maintenance shafts. Anyone who tries flanking us gets a surprise." Malcolm studied the facility schematic, his mind running through tactical scenarios with cold precision. Voss would bring her full team. Elena would be point. And somewhere in the transmission records, Joran would be watching, waiting to confirm his sister's recapture and collect his blood money. "We separate them," Malcolm said. "Serath, you're on Overwatch. Your hearing and field sense keep us from being surrounded. Lena, you disable their ship the second they dock. I'll handle the ground team." "And Elena?" Lena asked quietly. Malcolm's jaw tightened. "I'll handle her too." Serath touched his arm, her fingers gentle against his scarred skin. "You don't have to do this alone." He covered her hand with his, drawing strength from the contact. I know, but if it comes down to her or you, there's no choice, not anymore. The honesty in his voice settled something between them. Sereth nodded, her ears forward and alert, and they moved to position. The wait lasted 90 minutes before Voss's security corvette emerged from the debris field, its sleek hull bearing corporate insignia that looked obscene against the facility's decay. The ship docked with mechanical precision, and Malcolm watched through cover as the boarding team deployed, 8 figures in tactical armor, weapons raised, moving with professional efficiency. Elena led them. Even through the helmet, Malcolm recognized her movements, the way she checked corners, the angle of her weapon sweep. Muscle memory from training he'd helped her with when she was 14, learning self-defense in their cramped station apartment. The recognition hurt worse than any wound. Serath's hand touched his shoulder, 3 quick taps, their signal. She detected additional signatures moving through the upper levels. Flanking maneuver, exactly as predicted. Malcolm triggered the first charge. The explosion tore through a junction node, plunging half the facility into darkness and sending electrical feedback screaming through the damaged grid. Voss's team scattered, seeking cover, and in the chaos, Malcolm moved. He'd spent years in freight loading zones and station maintenance shafts. He knew how to use tight spaces and failing systems. His first target went down with a stunner round to the neck joint where armor was thinnest. The second managed to raise her weapon before Serath's voice crackled in his ear. 3 meters left, behind the support beam, she's tracking your heat signature. Malcolm rolled, and the plasma bolt scored the deck where he'd been standing. He returned fire, forcing the shooter back, then slipped into a service corridor that Serath guided him through with surgical precision. 2 more hostiles eliminated. Lena's charges took out another 3, attempting to flank through the maintenance levels, their screams cutting short as artificial gravity failed in their section. That left Elena and Voss. Malcolm found them in the central hub, where emergency lighting cast everything in sickly amber. Voss had taken cover behind a control bank, her weapon trained on the entrance. Elena stood exposed, her helmet removed, and her empty eyes swept the space with mechanical thoroughness. I know you're here, Malcolm, Elena called, her voice flat and wrong. Tactical analysis suggests you're in the eastern approach. You have one opportunity to surrender the asset peacefully. Asset, she called Serath an asset. Malcolm stepped into view, his weapon lowered but ready. Elena, it's me, it's your brother. Her expression didn't change. Genetic relation is irrelevant to contract fulfillment. You will surrender the Villani female, or you will be neutralized as a hostile threat. They broke you. His voice cracked despite his control. Whatever they did to your head, whatever conditioning they used, that's not who you are. You're Elena Hayes. You loved broken things and believed people deserved second chances. You told me you were proud of me. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in her eyes. Confusion, maybe, or the ghost of recognition. Then it vanished, locked behind walls of neural conditioning that had rebuilt her into a corporate weapon. Previous identity designation is irrelevant, she said, raising her weapon. Comply or be eliminated. Serath's voice whispered through his earpiece. She's shifting weight, left foot. She's going to... Elena fired. Malcolm dropped, the bolt searing past his shoulder, and returned stunning fire in the same motion. The round caught Elena center mass, overloading her armor's systems and dropping her unconscious. She collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, and Malcolm's chest constricted at how easily the fight left her body. Voss emerged from cover, weapon tracking him. Impressive, but ultimately pointless. You don't have leverage anymore. Malcolm kept his weapon steady. Your team is down, your ship is disabled, and the woman you're hunting isn't cargo. She's the person I'm choosing to stand with. You want to take her, you'll have to go through me. Voss's pale eyes narrowed. You're willing to die for stolen property? That's absurd. She's not property, she never was. Malcolm's voice was granite, and some things can't be bought, sold, or negotiated. A shape moved in his peripheral vision. Serath, emerging from shadow with Lena's plasma cutter gripped in both hands, her ears forward and her turquoise eyes blazing with controlled fury. She positioned herself beside Malcolm, weapon trained on Voss with steady hands. "You were right about one thing," Sereth said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I am stolen. I stole myself back from people who thought they could define my worth by what they could extract from me. My family, your corporation, anyone who thinks sentient beings can be inventory." Her finger tightened on the trigger. "You want to collect me? Try." Voss assessed the situation with professional calculation. 2 armed opponents, no backup, disabled ship. Her expression tightened with frustrated acceptance. "This isn't over," she said. "Yes, it is." Lena's voice crackled over the facility-wide comm. "I just transmitted your entire operation to 3 news networks and the Colonial Labor Board. Records of the trafficking ring, the names of everyone involved, evidence of neural conditioning on captives. You're not a security captain anymore. You're a fugitive." Voss's composure cracked, fury and disbelief warring across her features. Malcolm used her distraction to destroy her weapon with a precise shot, then gestured toward the exit with his stunner. "You're going to walk to your ship, Lena's going to unlock your engines, and you're going to run as far as your fuel takes you, because if I ever see you again, I won't be this merciful." Voss left without another word, dragging Elena's unconscious form with her. Malcolm watched them go, grief and relief tangled together in his chest. Elena was alive. She was broken beyond his ability to fix. And he was learning, slowly, painfully, that he had to accept both truths. Serath's hand slipped into his, warm and solid. "You let her go," she said softly. "I let her go." He pulled Serath against him, his arms wrapping around her while his chin rested on her hair. "She's not who I needed to save. Maybe she never was." They stood together in the wreckage while Lena completed her work, and when the security corvette limped away into the debris field, Malcolm finally allowed himself to breathe. Hours later, aboard the Wayfarer's observation deck, Serath sat with her platinum and pink hair loose around her shoulders, her ears relaxed and upright. Malcolm joined her, their hands finding each other automatically now, fingers threading together like they'd been designed to fit. "Where do we go?" she asked, watching stars drift past the viewport. "Frontier territories. Corporate law doesn't reach that far, and there's work for pilots willing to take risks." He squeezed her hand. "I can't promise you safety, can't promise certainty or comfort, but I can promise you'll never be treated as disposable again. Not by me, not by anyone while I'm breathing." Serath turned to face him fully, her turquoise eyes luminous in the dim light. "I learned something from you. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's refusing to let fear define you. My family taught me I was worth nothing except what I could provide. You taught me I was worth choosing, even when it was difficult, especially when it was difficult." Her hand came up to touch his face, confidence in the gesture that hadn't existed weeks ago. Malcolm leaned into her palm, then pulled her close until their foreheads pressed together, breathing the same air. "I'm choosing you too," he murmured. "Not because I need redemption or because you need saving, because when I look at you I see home." She kissed him then, soft and certain, and he responded with tenderness that made her ears flush darker pink and her pupils dilate wide. The kiss deepened slowly, exploration rather than urgency, 2 people learning the shape of each other's hope. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and smiling, Lena's voice crackled over the comm with deliberate loudness. "If you 2 are done being disgustingly romantic, we've got a course to plot. Frontier territories won't reach themselves." Malcolm laughed, the sound startled out of him, and Serath's answering smile was radiant and unguarded. They stood together, hands still intertwined, and moved toward the bridge where their future waited, uncertain and dangerous and entirely their own. The Wayfarer's engines hummed to life, carrying them toward the frontier and away from the worlds that tried to break them. Behind them, the mining facility drifted silent and empty, a monument to the moment 2 scarred souls refused to accept the roles assigned to them. They were no longer running. They were choosing, and that made all the difference.